Good morning, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Coffee and Something Stronger. My name is Cody Nord, Executive Director of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Coffee and Something Stronger is a coffee chat style interview show where we sit down with practitioners, academics, and faith leaders to talk at the intersections of faith, climate, and environmental justice. And this morning, we're going to do something a little bit different. This morning, we're here to have a panel discussion to talk about the first piece of President Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan, the American Jobs Plan, which he introduced and discussed in his infrastructure speech in Pittsburgh just last week on March 31st. We talk a lot about on this show about the need for a large-scale political action, not only to adequately address the climate crisis through clean energy, but to address the systemic environmental and economic problems facing communities in Georgia and across the nation. And this plan is a huge step in that direction. So this morning, to help me think about this and discuss this plan, we have Almeda Cooper, the Georgia Field Director with Moms Clean Air Force. Almeda, thanks for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
And Jillian Eller, the Conservation Organizer with the Georgia Chapter Sierra Club. Jillian, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us, Cody.
Of course. So to get started, why don't we do some introductions? Almeda, I'll go to you first. And if you could just say a little bit about how you got into the work that you're doing now and anything else you want to say about yourself.
Well, I'm relatively new to a formal role with Moms. I've really only been with Moms for about a month in my capacity as the field coordinator. But I come to it just because I've had a long time passion. First, really about clean water and lead pipes was kind of caught my attention, and the serious problems and how it affects children, particularly in daycare and in schools. And so it's kind of a logical next step to become involved on a broader scheme with Moms, because Moms is really addressing climate and how we can protect our children from air pollution and climate change. So prior to joining Moms, I had my first career was as a healthcare lawyer. And after I stepped away from full-time employment for a couple of years, I decided to re-engage.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Jillian, what about yourself?
Yeah, I got to the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club by way of a Quaker voluntary year of service. After doing a degree in environmental studies in Philadelphia, I was called to not only utilize my environmental background within my degree, but also to join in community with other young adults also pursuing social justice. I was lucky to be joining the Georgia team here at the Sierra Club and have been continuing on since the end of the summer. So it's great to have had that transition and be practicing what I've learned.
Awesome. Thank y'all for both being on the show this morning. And if you're watching, then you know that GIPL is strong partners with Moms Clean Air Force and the Georgia Sierra Club. So this is a good morning for us. Jillian, just to go back to you, and then we'll wrap back around. What are your initial thoughts hearing President Joe Biden's speech and the first part of this infrastructure package that he's putting forward?
Yeah, I think it's a great first move after the American Rescue Plan. The American Jobs Plan has been a really great shining beacon of hope, I would say, as we're now we're in relief mode. We've rescued, now we're in relief, and we need to rebuild. So my initial thought about the plan is that it has a lot in it, and I'm excited to dig in to more of those details with you both this morning.
Yeah. Almeda, what are your initial thoughts on the plan?
Like Jillian, what impresses me is that it seems like the first comprehensive investment in any time that I can remember to addressing all of these issues. It's really bold. It's covers, as Jillian mentioned, it's covering so many topics and really focusing in on climate and all, and a number of other kinds of issues that affect climate that many of us who are passionate about this have been waiting for. So it's
Yeah.
really exciting.
Yeah, I think I like the words that you all use, kind of this hope, and it's bold, and it's a vision. It's not only kind of a clean energy future, which is robust in its response to global climate change, but it's about access. It's about equitability. It's about ensuring that Americans can take advantage of the benefits of clean energy, of clean transportation, and also just transition. Um, the major piece of the plan, this is over a $2 trillion infrastructure package that covers investments in broadband, electric vehicles, elderly care, child benefits, housing, and developing future technologies. Almeda, in that category of stuff, what sticks out to you?
Well, I think from all from all of those things. I mean, one of the most important things to me is the fact that the focus on electrifying vehicles, particularly school buses. That has been a focus for us at Moms, and to see that there's adequate funding being put behind going to so many school systems to be able to, in a relatively short period of time, to change over from the current fossil fuels. I think that's huge, and again, having the money to do it is so important to schools. So that's a big issue, and also the fact that there's going to be money in the plan in order to address some of the chemicals, carbon, methane, to try to dramatically reduce those pollutants is really big.
Yeah, you talk about the electrification of school buses in particular, which is obviously important as this kind of clean transportation piece, but it's also, I would imagine, a public health issue, right? For students and for kids and for teachers and for parents who are around these buses all the time. Could you talk a little bit about kind of the public health aspect of that, and how that kind of weaves into why this plan's important?
Well, well, when you look at the related health conditions, particularly for children, in terms of asthma and other related, healthcare problems related to allergies and that sort of thing, clearly, children are going to school, they're taking buses, or they're standing waiting for buses, or, any of us who've ever been to school, which is most, all of us, you've stood around while the buses are, emitting all that pollutants into the air. So it's clearly a big issue, because it
Yeah,
affects so many children.
yeah. Thank you for that, Jillian. I know that you yourself, but also the Georgia Sierra Club, has been working on clean transportation for quite a while, and I imagine that you have some thoughts about the clean transportation pieces in this, not only buses but clean cars as well.
That's right. When we think about how many people use a personal vehicle every single day and the disproportionate effects that interstates here in Atlanta, we have a convergence of three major interstates, even just within the perimeter. So when you think about the opportunity that a mass electric vehicle infrastructure investment can have, not only investing in the physical cars and charging stations themselves, but you're investing in lives. You're investing in those communities that have disproportionately borne the brunt of this these toxic fumes. So we
Yeah,
are here at the Sierra Club. You're absolutely right, 100% behind electric vehicle transition.
yeah,
One of the things that Julian mentioned, and I think it's also worth saying, is that one of the barriers to electrical vehicles has been the practical part of the infrastructure to have charging stations. And
yeah,
there's money in this plan, or there's proposed money in this plan in order to build that infrastructure.
yeah,
And we generally in this country we have significant infrastructure deficits, but you have to be able to combine both focusing on changing to electrical vehicles, but also making sure that the infrastructure is there, makes it more realistic and more achievable. So I think that's a huge win as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you're watching the show and you're in Georgia, you might be familiar with Drawdown Georgia, the specific project drawdown that was tailored for what are the top 20 high impact climate solutions for Georgia. How could Georgia really tackle climate change? And electric vehicles is a huge piece of that. And the challenge here in Georgia and all across the nation is infrastructure. We know how to get electric vehicles, and people can buy those vehicles, but we do not have the infrastructure, even in our cities, much less in the more rural parts of the state. So that infrastructure piece is huge for implementing these climate solutions that we've known for a while, what we're going to need. And then there's also as we've kind of talked about, it is an environmental justice issue when you think about truck idling zones, bus idling zones, how much smog and pollution in cities especially are pumped out, into what communities are breathing that in and day out. And so it's a huge piece. There's this climate piece, there's the financial piece and benefit, and there's also the public health piece.
Right. And particularly, for communities of color, brown and Black communities in particular, a lot of the places where those vehicles idle and stand have been in or near in and near brown and Black communities. So it's another positive because, again, it's related to a lot of health issues, and it's a chain effect. You're eliminating a problem that's causing another problem. And so that's a positive.
Right. Well, and I'll say what I said again at the beginning of the show. What strikes me is that there is a thread of accessibility in this plan that, even when you think about the public transportation that we have here in Georgia, which is quite limited, even here in Atlanta, it's not terribly accessible. It's not terribly usable. And so, there was a piece in Biden's plan where he talks about, wouldn't it be great if you could travel across the country without ever using a drop of oil? You could ride on these high-speed trains and you could use these public transportations. And the idea that those kinds of public infrastructure and transportation would be accessible to all Americans and actually be usable and functional for people to get to work and to travel for pleasure and for function is huge, I think, and something that we truly have not had in the country. So I want to ask, I mentioned this earlier, but Jillian, I might pitch this to you and then I can say something about it as well. Maybe please feel free to weigh in. But something that was mentioned in the plan is broadband internet access for rural communities especially. And that here in Georgia has been a concern both for state legislators and for the Public Service Commission, how to get access to broadband internet to rural communities here. And I think it's incredibly important. And Jillian, I know that you've helped work on that some, and I thought, whatever thoughts you have, I would welcome on that.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. The broadband divide here in Georgia is pretty extreme, I would say. In my work advocating for environmental justice and, targeting communities that are inaccessible to broadband, and in this digital age, it's so hard to be able to connect with folks, to just reach out when there's no pathway for that to happen. Outside of my environmental work, I'm also, thinking and sympathizing with everybody at home who's working and educating. Education has taken such a drastic change in the last year, and just thinking about the types of barriers now that everything is online for folks that don't have broadband, that's a serious issue that doesn't just happen now, that spans generations. That's something that without that infrastructure, that really there is a huge divide between the ways in which communities have been invested before and the ways in which this plan can invest in communities now.
Julian, one thing I would say, this is kind of a ironic silver lining to the pandemic, that because of the broad way in which the lack of access to broadband has affected so many more people, I believe they are more sympathetic now to understanding why in rural communities in Georgia, and we have a large rural population, and as well in urban areas where children in certain communities have had lesser access, why it's so important. Now people get it, I think.
That's right.
Yeah, that education piece is huge. You know, this isn't, at least in Georgia, this isn't a partisan issue. We've been talking about broadband access for a really long time. And if you have tried to get an appointment for a COVID vaccine, then you know how important that internet connection is. There are communities who, of course, you can call in, but even just to get the information to know that when the majority of these appointments are being done online, it's just a huge, again, it's a public health concern. That broadband internet would be a public health concern is hard to imagine until it happens. And we're sitting in the midst of that right now.
Right.
I want to talk about first, I want to talk a little bit about unions, if we might, and collective bargaining power. And I'll do it very quickly because, Jillian, again, I'm going to ask you to speak to this. And really what I'm just reminded of is I thought about your colleague, Neil Sardana, so much, and labor organizing, and how that intersects with so much of the work that we do. And we have talked, I know our organizations, but also a lot of other organizations working on these issues, about the need for a just transition. And how does that happen? And who pays for it? And how do we ensure that people who are hard at work in extractive industries still have jobs on the other side of this? And so I kind of want to talk about that bucket of issues, and I'll pass it over to you first, Jillian.
Well, that is a heaping bucket of issues you've passed over to me, Cody.
You're so welcome.
Something that I heard recently that I'd love to quote in this space, and forgive me for not knowing who it originated from, but the thing is, it's either just a transition or we have a just transition. Things are going to change with or without us. And being there, being vocal, being strong together, union jobs can help us be more resilient after. So the just transition really does need to be rooted in, climate, justice, and jobs. And the trifecta of those is really, really prominent in this American Jobs Plan. I think that, one thing that I've been tossing around in my head is just how much the extractive industries have the opportunity to be at the forefront of that just transition. We have a growing climate and clean energy job sector here in Georgia. Before the pandemic, it was rising by 70% every year. And that's a huge opportunity that this plan can really take full throttle of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When we think about how that just transition happens here in Georgia and how we get people plugged into those kind of jobs. I mean, I think even just today, but also last week, there's been all these different proposals kind of set forth an intention about nationwide offshore wind and exploring what those possibilities are, Georgia being one of those that could produce a significant amount of offshore wind to offset huge percentages of our energy use, and that whole new system of creating energy that we have not done, that are good jobs and would be around for a long time. And it's going to take a lot to get those kind of infrastructure pieces built out. Almeda, what say you?
Well, what I really was thinking about when you were speaking is that when the president spoke last week, he really emphasized the creation of jobs, that with the building of infrastructure and alternative sources of energy, and even in terms of the retrofitting of homes and businesses related to lead pipes, you're going to get kind of a 2-for-1. One, we're going to improve the economy, and two, we're going to create jobs for people. We're going to improve the climate and the economy. So that, I mean, that's kind of the best of all possible worlds.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think transitioning to that lead pipes piece is that for years we have done a lot of screenings and work on kind of the story of Flint, Michigan, and how that problem of those poisoned households, poisoned kids, poisoned community members, that were knowingly that was happening to, that was happening in cities all across the country, that a core piece of that was there are hundreds of cities that still have significant amounts of lead pipes that need to be replaced or that aren't being monitored. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the importance of that specific piece. I think that is one of the most inspiring, thoughtful, simple yet robust parts of the plan is here's a bad thing. There's still lead pipes that people are using for drinking water. What if we replace all of them? Like that seems like such a no-brainer. And yeah, talk a little bit about that.
The significance of the lead pipe problem is that it has historically, the barrier has been cost. The estimates, I know that the Environmental Defense Fund had statistics that suggested to replace all of the lead pipes in the country in homes would be about $4 billion. And so as communities over the last, several, 10 years or so have really been looking at how to address this problem, and they figured out it was very, very expensive. The original thought was we're going to have this public-private partnership where the city will change out the pipes up to the homeowner or the business property line, and then the owner of the building will replace the pipe at their own expense from the property line to the building. Well, what most people didn't realize until they started to do it was that lead is highly unstable. So even if the homeowner said, oh, I can't afford a couple $1,000s to replace the lead pipe, and the city is just going to replace it up to the property line, it dislodged all the lead particulate and had a terrible impact anyway. And it was disproportionately impacting people with modest incomes, particularly again in brown and black neighborhoods, because they had more pressing immediate needs that, and sometimes just didn't have a couple $1,000s to replace that pipe. So the modern thinking and the current thinking in Washington, D.C. is probably the best example of a major city that's made this change. Is that they changed their policy, and now when they replace lead pipes, the city replaces the entire pipe all the way to the building or the homeowner's home. And it's particularly important again in schools because you can't see lead. It's not like you can look at the water and go, oh, there's lead in the water. We know that that the particulates have been discharged. And so it's been a huge problem. And again, having enough funds put to this problem is huge, and there's no amount of lead that is safe for children, pregnant women, or any of us.
Yeah, that's a huge piece. Thank you for saying that line. That was a line that stuck out to me in the speech, is that let's be both honest about what it is. There's no safe exposure for anyone to lead, especially children. And let's be honest about how much it's going to cost. And then let's fix the problem because we're capable of doing all those things. And you're so right. When we look at cases like Flint and other places, it's that the water itself, the chemicals in the water itself, what we put into it to treat it, can dislodge the lead in the pipes. It can be the replacements that we do. And there are so many inequities that I can think about when it comes to infrastructure, but one of those is exactly what you just said. We have forever kind of set up this system where, sure, we'll replace some of the pipes, but really once it gets to your own home, you're responsible for that, and you're responsible for whatever happens to you because of that. And it's just a huge inequity that this plan helps to solve. Jillian, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a curious thing that I just started reading What the Eyes Don't See, which it speaks exactly to this health crisis that led poisoning families, children, communities is overlooked. And honestly, it feels like something that for so long the can was just kicked down the road. Oh, we'll fix a little portion. Oh, we'll bring in water. Oh, we'll just switch the connection for the water. But if the infrastructure isn't there, and we keep going back to this infrastructure, that needs to be in place to support an infrastructure of the community. I sort of think about the infrastructure not only as physical, but also as social, cultural kinds of infrastructure too.
Yeah, a piece that is, I think, for us in Georgia, tangentially related to this, and I want to talk a little bit more about it. But Jillian, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about this project, which is briefly kind of coal ash storage and clean water in Georgia. Is that there's a piece where this infrastructure piece and grid modernization ties into how we produce energy in the state. And I want to talk about that, but I wanted to also highlight this other environmental justice issue, which is so related to clean water and communities having to pay for their own water, communities having to figure out how to get their own water lines. So just kind of highlight that for the people who are tuning in, because I do think it's related.
Yeah, wow. If this plan actualizes water lines for folks in Juliet and across the state that are experiencing coal ash and drinking wells, that would be incredible. That would be really what pushes this over the edge for me as a personal stake in this matter. Coal has been burned in Georgia for decades. We have two of the highest burning coal plants in the nation. And not only do we have coal ash, which is residual matter from burning coal from our power, but we also have it from our neighbors. We made it incredibly lucrative for our state to accept coal ash from other states. And now we have millions of tons of coal ash in unlined pits that are contaminating drinking water. And it's not only in rural Georgia. This is contaminating the Chattahoochee River that supplies Atlanta's drinking water. So when you think about the intersectionality, even just of water issues, there are so many missing pieces that have been left and disinvested in when it comes to an essential need for all of life. It's one of our basic human needs, right? Water. We need water. We all need this stuff, yet nobody is looking out for it except ourselves. So that's what I have to say about coal ash.
Yeah. Well, I think that that piece is super important because I think it highlights the intersectionality of so many of these issues in this place that we're dealing with here in Georgia. Other communities across the Southeast are dealing with coal ash in a variety of ways. And it points to how I think this infrastructure package sets us up to then on the local, state, and federal level go even further to address these other kinds of issues that are related to our past energy production as we look towards what kind of future energy needs that we want to meet. And I have a question about that, but Almeda, I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on coal ash and that kind of production.
Well, I think Jillian has really covered it well. I think the only thing I would add, and again, I think it's because health issues always come to the fore for me. There's so many medical conditions that are related to this, to the coal ash and to the pollutants, and they're pretty serious, including, cancer and other medical conditions that really adversely affect a person's health.
Yeah. The last thing that I wanted to kind of talk about that comes out of this plan that I think is super important for us and that has also been in the news because of isolated grids in this country, namely in Texas, but also this kind of happens across the nation where we're facing this need that we need to modernize our grid. Again, going back to Drawdown Georgia, if you're living in this state, grid modernization is a huge climate solution. It's the whole way that we're going to make this thing work. And I thought it was really poignant that was brought into this plan. And so I wanted to offer up for either of you who wanted to speak to kind of grid modernization and the importance and how that intersects with the rest of this plan to do that.
I am not an expert on grid modernization, but from a very practical standpoint, we know we need power, particularly, whether you're on a farm and you need it in order to, do your farming, or whether you're in a city, you cannot function. And of course, Texas and its recent issues are very dramatic because our systems are not set up for particularly people in urban areas to go for long periods of time without either, whether it's winter or whether it's summer. And it has dramatic and drastic impact on people with pre-existing health conditions. And it has a dramatic impact on people who need to have, any type of medical device to, that's necessary for them to live. So we need electricity, and we need to have
definitely.
it, in a sustainable way that people can reasonably expect it's going to be there.
Yeah. Jillian, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I really appreciate Almeda for bringing up the necessity for electricity in all parts of our lives. It's, preserving the food that we eat. It's keeping our hospitals open. It's ensuring that we have services for our communities. And I think that this plan really highlights the need for decentralization and resiliency in our grid. Like you mentioned, Texas, that was an overuse of the system that had been just disinvested in because of the way Texas's grid is set up. They put the profit over the people. And I think that this plan is a way to really emphasize that people need to come before profit. And that the way that we do that is that we put people into jobs and we get them there, and we get us all there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, yeah, just to be clear, that's a primary coal, primary natural gas situation on that grid that failed. And we know that those types of power generation are not only polluting, but they aren't as resilient as some of our renewable measures. We know that through this grid modernization, that's going to give us some of the things that you were kind of looking toward, Jillian, like microgrids, like putting actual power sources where we use the power so as not to waste it on our grid, so as not to overburden the grid, and so that people can really have a sense of energy democracy with that dispersed power, like you were mentioning. As we come to the end of our interview, I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to just say kind of what your final thoughts are on this plan, what your hopes are for the future coming out of this plan. But I just wanted to say, for those people who are listening to our conversation, some of the things that I was thinking about is that this infrastructure package is huge. And the way that it tackles clean energy, it's going to implement clean energy across the nation. It's going to provide for a just transition. It's going to help us combat global climate change. However, if all that you're getting out of that is that these are going to be clean energy measures to help us rein in our carbon emissions and combat global climate change, I don't think you're getting the full picture. I think this is clearly, all of these things have impacts on environmental justice. All of these things are public health issues. They're all food related issues. They're all transportation related issues. They're all equity issues, accessibility issues. So it's truly an intersectional plan when you really trace all these lines together. And I think it's a really good starting point. But final thoughts, Almeda, as we're coming out of this?
Well, addressing climate change really is a way to have a safe and clean environment for all communities, and especially for communities that have not always had access, particularly minority communities. And I guess the other thing, I guess particularly from the standpoint of moms, Clean Air Force, is that we really focus on children's health, and having a safe, clean environment is what we think our children and even our grandchildren deserve. So we're excited about it.
Jillian.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful about the American Jobs Plan. I think that it's about time that we have some true investment in job creation, in environmental justice, and reacting to the impending climate change effects that we're already seeing. I think that the leadership from President Joe Biden, which is just so wonderful to say still, President Joe Biden, that this is the start of a long legacy of improvements for the nation as well as Georgia. So I'm pleased by this, and will continue to look for more great work coming out of the Biden administration.
Yeah, this is a great step forward. There's clearly more to be done, but this is a massive step in producing the kind of change, the robust change, the large change that we need in order to tackle these problems. And I think, to use Biden's own phrase, if we start to commit to these things now, if we start to implement them now, then people will look back and we would have won the future by starting to innovate in this way. And so if you're watching this show and you're wondering, so what do I do now? Then I would encourage you to call your federal representatives, call your senators and say, hey, I believe in this plan. I believe in clean energy. I want to see a just transition. I want to see accessible, equitable climate solutions. And please, what can we do to work on this plan, to pass elements of this plan and get it implemented? And also, call your local leaders and your state leaders and say, this is the kind of vision that we want. This is what we want Georgia to be like. We want to implement these solutions. Georgia wants to be a climate leader. And I think this is a huge opportunity for us to do this. Almeda and Jillian, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning. Almeda, go ahead.
Well, Cody, one thing I do think it's important to share with your viewers is that we're very fortunate in Georgia that our U.S. senators, Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock, are already huge climate supporters. I believe also that Representative Nikema Williams and Lucy McBath are also very much in support of climate change and doing what we can to protect our communities. So when you call, you will have the advantage of having a welcoming ear. So I thought that was important that we include that.
Definitely. And it's important that we thank the representatives and senators who are already on board and helping to try to lead in this conversation. So that's a great point. Well, thank you all for both coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Next week, we will begin on Tuesday, April 13th, our Eco Faith from Home 30 Days of Climate Action. So please be sure to register for that. Tune in. We will have more conversations about the Build Back Better plan and federal climate policy in that series of workshops. So please tune in. It's free. Register. We'll drop the link in the description for this video. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Jillian.
Thanks, y'all.